How's it going, everybody? This is Nathan with the Birds in the Lees. I am here with my lovely wife, Kim. Kim, how are you?
I'm doing great today.
And yeah, we're doing great. It's quarantine week 80, and we are stuck inside once again. And, we're doing the very best we can. I got to tell you, I'm running out of things to break in the house. So I figure that better be lifted soon. But tonight, I'm excited. Tonight, I'm excited because we have a very special guest, a good friend of ours, someone that I have had the pleasure of working with in the past at a previous church I was at, and just an all-around really awesome and great guy. Oscar Camacho, how are you tonight, Oscar?
Great. I am good. It's week 170 here in Carrollton.
Oh, really? You guys went in earlier than we did?
Yeah. Well, with the time difference, and it feels that way.
Yeah, the time difference between counties, is that what it is?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I just feel that way.
Yes, and I do just feel that way. We're kind of in the same boat. Well, we have sons that are the same age, right?
Let's see. Julian's 11.
Yeah, Garrett's turning 10 tomorrow,
Yeah.
so they're pretty close to the same age. So yeah, you kind of are in that 10, 11-year-old wheelhouse where, at some point somebody's trying to be a Jedi.
Well, more often than not.
Yes. And something that as we were setting this up, Oscar asked me if we could get into his Jar Jar Sith theories at some point.
No, he did not.
Yes, he did. But that's a whole other podcast.
I believe my agent should have sent that ahead of time. Did she not send that?
Was that in the writer
Right.
that you get to talk about it?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have to dedicate at least 10% of whatever time we spend together going over. I mean, it's standard procedure stuff.
Standard procedure. Yes, That's what it is. Well, and that brings up a very good point, because you are a man of many interests and many trades. Obviously, from having known you for several years now, you are a writer. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
You are you're an audio and production guy.
Yes.
Yes, and you are also a DJ.
Yes.
And you're the guy to go to if you want good food. You know where to go.
That is correct.
Yes, and I do appreciate your recommendations. One of my favorite memories on our staff was when we did the great Find the Best Taco in Dallas day. And every recommendation, every place that they mentioned, I watched your face just sink.
The place that my team went to didn't even have tacos.
It didn't.
They didn't serve tacos. It was a Mexican restaurant, but they didn't serve tacos. They just served like homemade soups and stews and stuff like that. So when we got there and we're like, hey, we're doing this taco thing, and they're like, man, we don't serve tacos here. And so that was pretty awesome too.
Yeah.
We did not
I
win.
remember that.
Obviously.
No, we didn't win either. I had brain tacos, and there was no way to sell that to anybody.
Ew.
Oh man.
That was my one opportunity to eat something that had brains in it, and I went for it. So
gross.
Yeah, it was pretty gross. I'm not gonna lie. Somebody asked me, and I said it's kind of like meat flavored marshmallows. So, yeah, exactly. But we digress because we have other subjects to talk about. So if you've been listening, and you know that Kim and I started this podcast as just an opportunity and a little side venture to kind of tell our story, but at the same time reach out to others who are in ministry, other pastoral families, ministry families who, kind of to open up the door and say, hey, you know what, we're all kind of experiencing the same thing. You're not in this vacuum or in isolation in the things you experience. And that was part of the reason we were at a birthday party for a mutual friend and just kind of sharing, catching up with each other. And it seemed that we hit you mentioned something we're going to get to in a minute that I thought we both, Kim and I both went, yeah, that's 100% what this podcast is about, and wanting to get you on here. But first, what I wanted to do is just ask you if you could just share with everyone, how did you get into ministry as a whole? Was that something you had aspired to be in early on in life, or did you just, kind of like me at one point, just woke up one morning and went, whoa, wait, this is what I'm doing?
I'm sorry, you were cutting out. Can you repeat that?
Yeah. My question for you first is, we all have different stories of how we kind of ended up working in ministry in general. Whether it's, I went the road of youth pastor and now I'm a family pastor. Kind of what's your story and where you got to where you are now?
Oh, okay. So I was actually born in seminary while my parents were in seminary. And so I had no choice. I was destined to be in ministry. No, so my parents were in seminary when I was born. And so I've been in church and ministry my whole life. I grew up playing music, playing piano and stuff like that. And so I never thought I'd do anything pastoral or I just wanted to play music, basically. And I was involved in sports and stuff like that. And so I thought that was going to be kind of what, ministry-wise, what I was going to be doing. Once I turned 14, I started doing more tech stuff. And for the past however many years, that's been kind of my ministry is doing tech, training other churches and doing tech, traveling and just sharing with churches how to do tech better, how to look at it from a ministry perspective instead of just pushing buttons and stuff like that. And the more I kept doing it, the more I felt like there was a need for people to understand the ministry side of it. And so that's kind of where I've been. The last couple of years have turned more, have taken more of a pastoral role as I've begun to work with volunteers and developing volunteers. And so I've been a little more hands off of equipment and more spending time with people and actually, going out to eat with them or having coffee and just asking questions like, how are you doing? What can I pray for you about? And stuff like that. And so it's turned more ministry. And I've always felt like there was a calling for that, but it's in the last 2 years that I've really felt like God saying, now is the time for you to do this pastoral stuff. And I've always said, like, God's always used the tech thing as an excuse to get me into conversations with pastors. And so I would go visit a pastor because they needed help with equipment. And as we're working through stuff, the conversation, like almost every time, will turn into that pastor sharing something about his church or his team or his family, and me having the opportunity to just pray with them and say, hey, I hear you. I understand. And like, here's what's worked for us, or, here's how we've prayed through things like this before. And so that's kind of the space that I've been in ministry wise.
Okay. And I think that brings up something that, as I got to know you, really appreciated, because I always used to joke that whenever every church that I've been in, the first guys I make fun of, not make fun of, sorry. I did make fun of them.
It's weird
Excuse
that you
me.
got let go from a church.
Yeah,
It's so weird.
So amazing.
Yeah. Wow. Boy, that was a faux pas. No, the first guys I make friends with are the tech guys. Because, that was always the thing I said was, the first group of guys I want to go, and women, obviously, because they're part of it too. I want to go make friends with them because
Man, you're just taking that
I'm
shovel.
really shooting myself in the foot on this.
And we'll be back after this short message.
We may not be back. But this is how we like it. We like it raw and unedited, right? No. No, because I agree with you on that. I think there's the misconception that the whole button pusher misconception, but with the amount of people who love to do that and aspire to and want to do it, there's definitely a ministry route just in like you said, the volunteers you get to meet with, that you get to have conversations with, and I think a lot of times the mistake that I've bumped into people's misperception or misunderstanding of ministry is that you have to have the title pastor to be pastoral, and that's not it at all. Pastoral care is whoever, obviously, it's what we're all called to, in a sense, is we're all called to pastoral care of people. And so, I always appreciated that viewpoint of, the more, I guess, holistic view of everybody has a role to play within a church, and every role is just as important as the other. There's no one that stands alone, because they all need each other. So there's that kind of very symbiotic relationship with everything. So my thing is, I don't know if people often appreciate the amount of work you guys do, because you're probably up there more than anybody, I would say, right?
Yeah, and one of the things I always tell our volunteers or anybody that I'm talking to about tech is that we have to realize the importance of our job, that everything that happens on stage runs through our hands and ears and eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not just that you're pushing a button, and you have to know which buttons to push and all of that, but understanding the responsibility that everything that happens on stage is going to go through you. And so, yes, you do need to know which buttons to push and all of that, but you also need to have prepared yourself coming into a Sunday or a Wednesday or whatever service, so that you're in sync with the people that are up there. And so it's a lot more than just, I know when to mute this or unmute it or bring this up or down. It's understanding that the importance that people's, and this is, it sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but understanding that people's eternal future is at stake.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't come prepared, if you don't understand that, and you're just pushing buttons and you push the wrong one or whatever, and that message is not being able to be preached clearly, or it won't be understood, or there'll be a distraction. And so it's to me, and to, I would say, the teams that I work with, that's been we always think about that. Like, we always make it a point to understand that we have a big responsibility, and it's not just having a warm body up there that can push a button. Like, there is a very real responsibility that we have to make sure that the message is being heard clearly, that the songs are being transmitted clearly, and that we're not a distraction, but we're an instrument to get the word out.
Yeah, you guys are really cliche, the unseen piece of the puzzle, right? Because that's part of your job, is you don't want to be seen, because if they see you, that means things aren't going smoothly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're working with because I work with volunteers all the time. Do you feel like once you've gotten that across to them, do you see a change in how they approach? And I know this is going down a different road, and I'm going to bring us back around to where, kind of where we're going tonight. But I find this really interesting in the sense of talking about volunteers, because I feel like that's the struggle everybody has, is how to get people who want to help. And I think there's a difference between helping and then really diving into serve.
Right.
And I don't know if you would agree with that, but I think there's people who like, hey, I got this and I want to do something. But then there's this communication that you have to get across and say, well, this is more than just doing something. And I can think, it was always fun to watch, especially with youth or teens, when that kind of clicked with them. And, personally, I don't know if that's something that we're struggling a little bit more with now to communicate to people. But do you feel like there's seems to be a definite point when they get it?
Yeah. So for me, I try and lay it all out on the table from the first time that we meet. And so kind of my onboarding process is to have coffee with somebody that's interested and then lay it all out and say, this is who we are. This is our team. This is what we do. These is our responsibilities. This is what you can expect from us. What do you want to get out of it? What's your experience level? And getting all that information out from them, and so that they have a clear understanding of what it is that we do and what we're expecting. And as I'm laying all that stuff out, I there's people that say, oh, I just want to do audio, and that's cool. But one of the things I want to do with volunteers is that's great that you want to do audio, but I want to give you some touches on lighting, and I want to give you some touches on camera, because you might find out that doing camera is something that you actually really, really love and that you're actually really good at. And so I don't want people to just be locked down to, I just do this. And so if it sounds a little bit harsh, but if that's what that person wants to do, then we're probably not the right fit for them. And that's okay. There's been a lot of times that we've gotten volunteers that really want to help, really want to work, but it's just not a good fit. And so we do more damage by trying to make a square peg fit into a round hole rather than say, well, let's pray about this. Maybe what you wanted, where you can serve is in this other ministry or whatever. And so there's definitely a moment when it clicks. I think my responsibility is to help them get there, to help them understand, like, oh, yes, like what I'm doing matters. What I do is of importance. They do see me. They do appreciate me. And I think I would like to think that we have a lot more success stories because of that. I think a lot of our guys and girls tend to get it pretty quickly. And that comes from my personality and the personality of the rest of the guys on our team. You know how I am, so you know that I like to joke around, and that's part of our DNA as a team is we joke around. We'll make memes of each other. We'll Photoshop our faces on stuff because we want it. We don't want it to be so dry and so religious or what. Like that's not who I am outside of church. And so the person that you see at church is the same person that you see here at my house, the same person that you see anywhere that I go. And so I want people to see that. And so I think when they get that, when they understand that, that's one of those things that's one of those times that they get it, like, okay, yeah, I can serve and I can be myself and I can bring my talents and my strengths to this team.
That's awesome. Well, and you bring up a good point, because we actually had a conversation with a friend of ours who's a pastor and his wife, and they brought up the same thing about that consistency of character. Who I am at church is the same person I am, at home. And the person you are, and as again, and I feel like we have a limited time. Obviously, we work together and we hung out in that context, but just having conversations and listening to you now, this larger picture of ministry and pastoral ministry. And you mentioned something a little while ago about how this opportunity in tech has opened up doors for you to speak with pastors, to care for them and pray for them. And as we had our conversation, it's probably been a month and a half, maybe. I don't know. It's been a while.
Seems like years.
It seems like years. You're in this position now where you've gotten involved in some very focused care for pastors.
Yeah.
And that's what that was part of what I wanted to talk about with you tonight, because Kim and I, that's something that's been really big on our heart, because we've actually gone through some pretty traumatic experience in ministry. That's kind of what brought us to where we were working together. And it seems like that there's a lot of how to be a great pastor, but not necessarily so much about how to care for those guys and care for women and take care of them so that they don't experience the burnout or the stress, because it is a stressful job. So, probably I don't want to speak for you, but maybe kind of give a picture of what you're doing now.
So this is something that happened, 2 years ago now that I went to Cuba. And God had already been kind of stirring my heart a little bit more, like I was saying, into ministry and all of that. And so I was going to Cuba with some friends. To They were two pastor friends, and they were going down there to just kind of pray with pastors and meet the churches down there, and it was just a trip to basically just see what this ministry is doing down there. I was going because I was going to talk to the tech people there and figure out what they're doing and how can we help, with what they have. And about a week before the trip, the guy that had organized this trip and everything sent me a text and said, "Hey, we're switching up the trip. We're gonna land in a different city. We're gonna land in Havana, and then from there, we're gonna go meet with some pastors, and they want you guys to talk." And so it was in a text thread, and so I was like, "Oh, cool. I wonder what you guys are gonna talk about, because I'm there for sound and tech." And so he was like, "No, they want you to speak as well. And here's a list of topics." And one of the topics was pastoral family. And so I was like, "Oh, I know for a fact that I can't talk about, all these other topics." And it was like super deep theology stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm not even going to touch any of that. But I can speak about pastoral families because I'm a pastor's kid. My grandparents were pastors. My great-grandparents were pastors. So I can talk about that stuff all day just from my experiences. And so I was like, I'll do that. So my dad's dropping me off at the airport, and the whole trip we're just like not even talking that much. And right as I grab my backpack and my suitcase out of the trunk, he's still inside in the car, and he looks at me as I'm closing the door, and he says, "Hey, you have a lot to say that God's given you, so just do that. Just talk. Just share what God's given you." And it's in that motion that I'm closing the door, and I was like, "Wait a minute, what does that mean? Like, what do you mean say what God's given me? Like, what are you talking about?" And he goes, "All right, see you later." And then he drove off. And so I'm like, "Oh, snap. Like, what did he mean?" And then he wouldn't pick up his phone. Like, and that's my dad. I get my prankingness and all of that stuff from him. So that's very on par for him to throw something heavy at me and then just bail out. So I'm sitting with that in the plane, and so I'm just thinking like, okay, well, I'm just gonna talk from my experiences as a pastor's kid. And so we spent 5 days in Cuba. Out of those 5 days, I spent 3 hours talking about tech stuff, and the rest of the time, I was just sitting down with pastors and sharing about my experience as a kid, as a pastor's kid, and they would ask me questions. And one pastor said, "Hey, one of our sons has walked away completely from the Lord. Wow. And how would you deal with that? Have you experienced something like that?" And so we'd actually experienced something like that before. And so I said, well, this is what we did when someone from our family walked away from the Lord. And as I'm explaining it, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I do have something to say. Like my dad was right. And then God just began to speak to me and say, this is your time. It's time for you to open your mouth and talk. And from that point on, I started being more focused on when I talk to pastors and ask questions about soul care and stuff like that. When I came back from Cuba, a friend of mine who was a youth pastor at a church that I worked at some years ago calls me up and says, "Hey, can you help me edit this book that I'm working on?" And I said, "Sure." And as we begin to talk, he starts telling me about this nonprofit that he started called Replenish. And so he's like, "I want you to go on a Replenish trip, and you need to go, you need to go, you need to go." And so I was like, "Okay, well, tell me what it is." So Replenish is an organization that takes pastors away for on short trips, 4 days, 5 days, and it's all soul care. And so it's
Mm.
super relaxed. It's there's not a big agenda of conferences and doing this and that. It's basically you go away and you take care of yourself. You take care of your soul. We talk about understanding that we have a soul, that it needs
Mm-hmm.
care, and that in ways to prevent that burnout, ways to prevent hitting that wall. And so I went on a trip last year, and it was so powerful to you're forced to deal with your inner thoughts and everything
Mm-hmm.
because there's a bunch of white space that's built in intentionally for you to deal with that, for you to
Yeah.
to think about that. And so um the trip that I was on, there was 8 of us. There's normally 10 to 12 pastors that go on a trip like this. Our trip was a little bit smaller. There were executive pastors on our trip, and so it was cool to see how an executive pastor deals with burnout and how they deal with distress and everything, and then learning from each other, and coming away from that um, saying, man, like this is the type of thing that I want to do. Like I want to be more involved in this. I want to help other pastors experience what I did, and figure out ways to avoid a burnout, to see the signs, and and um, and so that's kind of how I've been involved in this. Um, Last year there were 8 trips. This year we had 20 trips planned. Obviously,
Wow.
that's um, been it's changed because of everything that's
Yeah.
happening right now. um, but what we're doing is Zoom calls and just
Yeah.
sitting down with pastors and just listening to them. And so the kind of the way that the trip works is you you show up at the city that you're supposed to be at, or if
Mm-hmm.
it's local or whatever, you have a meet and greet at a coffee shop, and then that night we have a short meeting and we just talk about expectations. And then the next morning we have breakfast, we have a meeting in the morning, we have a meeting around lunch, and then we have a meeting in the at night. And that's kind of the rhythm for it.
Mm-hmm.
And the meetings are pretty short, um, because we want pastors to just rest. For a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
them, this is the first time they've had a day off in months, some people years. And so, you know, we want them to sleep. Like if they're always having to wake up early because they have to take kids to school and blah 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 blah, like, hey, sleep in late. Like don't worry
Yeah.
about getting up at 6 in the morning. Like wake up at 8 or 9 and get that rest and learn a new rhythm. Like um take care of yourself because um as pastors and as people in ministry, um if you burn out, like everybody's so important, and these guys are leaders and they're in that front line, so they need that rest in order to be able to continue the work that they're doing. I don't believe that God wants us to burn out. I don't believe that
Mm-hmm.
God wants us to just go so hard that um, we just burn out before we're supposed to. I think God wants us to have a rhythm of rest, and even in Genesis it talks about he took a day off. He had that Sabbath,
Mm-hmm.
and so for a lot of pastors that's not a reality, but it needs to be it needs to be something that they practice in order to be able to fill themselves up and be able to have something to give.
Mm. Do you feel like, or in your experience with this, have you seen maybe the primary issue being a busyness, or there are other things that kind of pop up into that burnout that raise that danger level of that? Mm, mm, mm-hmm. Mm, yeah, yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we found that with our personal story was, you know, I was let go from a church, and a lot of situations we've seen lots of people who've had that happen, but there's always seems to be a very there's some element of it that's fairly unique that you can feel kind of out there by yourself, and you know this is my experience. Nobody else understands this. Nobody has anything that they can feed into that because it's so unique. But to you know what you're saying, I mean, we have so many shared experiences in the world of being in ministry that you can speak into different things. And you know, obviously, for you, I'm curious is in doing this, how has that impacted you personally? You know, from you. My impression is, man, you've got a foot in a lot of different worlds, and you know, and here you are, you're doing this awesome and I believe very vital ministry to pastors about burnout. You know, how does that manifest with you?
So for me, the example comes from my dad, from my
Mm-hmm.
parents, and my grandparents. From my parents because um, there's three. I have two other siblings, two brothers, two younger brothers, and we all played sports. We all did music. My dad showed up to every basketball game, every
Wow.
football game, every wrestling match, every soccer game, every band concert. Um, he was just there,
Yeah.
and so it gave us that um, example that um, we were more important to him than anything else.
Mm.
And so our view of ministry is our family is first. my kids, my wife is first before church, before the ministry. They're my first ministry. And so from that, I filter kind of my whole ministry or my whole thought of ministry through that. Like if my family's first, and so I need to make sure that I'm there for my kids' recitals and soccer games and whatever. Because I'm telling you, like, we would look at the stands, and my dad was the guy over there yelling at us, and either cheering us on or telling us, do this, do that, or whatever. And actually, with my middle brother, he was a goalie, I think his freshman and sophomore year. And my dad would sit behind the goal and would coach him to the point where our coach would be like, "Hey, can you tell your dad to sit in the stand?" And so it was funny because we were like, "Dad, you can't, you got to sit in the stands." But it was awesome that I knew that I could always look in the stands and my dad would be there.
Yeah.
And even when I
cool.
when I went to college, I was in a percussion ensemble, and my dad showed up to my recital, and I'm 22 years old, and my dad's there, and I could see him, and he's waving and everything, and so that was awesome, like to know that I was more important to him than whatever meeting he might have had that day.
Yeah.
That he moved stuff around so that he could be there for us, and so. That's my example of ministry is a healthy one, is something that we've been through a ton of stuff. We've been through people stabbing us in the back, church splits, and all of this stuff. But at the end of the day, it was almost like none of that stuff mattered because we knew that my parents loved us and that we were like the church could split and everything else, but you know what? That's fine. It's God's church. And what mattered is that we were together as a family. And then if a ton of people left, that was fine. We were continuing to meet on Sundays or continuing to have prayer meetings. And then people would come and join us. And the ministry was us. So the ministry grew out of that. And so as I've experienced now being outside of his church for, almost 20 years and dealing with my own, church splits and all of that, I'm still looking at like my family is my ministry and people can leave, but other people will be added to this this core group here. And those bad things are part of life, just like everything else. And we love people and we forgive them and all of that. But what's really shaped me is that example of no matter what happens, our family needs to be first, and people will see that. And people that want to experience that and want to learn how to do that are the ones that are going to stay with us and grow with us. And that's the kind of church that we want to be a part of.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, you mentioned, and I won't take up too much more of your time because I definitely, I can see you being on here regularly. Like we need to have an Oscar corner.
I like that.
That would be cool. So for Replenish, kind of what's the future looking like? I mean, obviously we're in the middle of this Corona thing, and you're talking about the Zoom meetings and the care and that. Has there been any conversation of this is kind of a unique paradigm, and if it continues on, has this changed? And the reason I ask that is for us, even in a local church, we're kind of forced into this digital, online kind of ministry more than we ever have before, but we kind of almost don't see us backing away from it even after we're in a physical building. It's not something we're going to abandon. Like this has become, another outlet for that. Do you feel like that's maybe expanding the ministry of Replenish, beyond, obviously you have the retreats but maybe even more of a resource there?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say it's forced us to be creative. I think it's awakened something in us to be more creative. you'll need to talk to Rod Jones, who's the head of this, and he's something else. He's very he's that type of guy that it's super creative when it comes to you know, man, this isn't working, and he's like, nah, bro,
Yeah.
let's do this instead, and calling plays at the line type of thing. Loves to play with audibles, and so
Yeah.
this has just created an opportunity to be more creative, and we can't do the trips that we were supposed to be on right now. So how do we still minister to these pastors? How do we still care for them? And so it's, hey, let's send out a text message. Hey, how are you feeling today? What can I pray for you about? And just doing that one-on-one until we can get to a place where we can do the trips again. The way that pastors can come and do these trips is because, for example, if I'm leading a trip, then I'll pray for people that I know that need this trip. And so I would pray and kind of go through my list of people that I know and say, well, I think Nathan needs to go on this trip.
Yeah.
And then, well, I know this other pastor that should go on this trip. And so you kind of put that trip together. And so with our website and everything now, people are able to apply and everything. And now we get people that we have no idea where they come from and who they are or any of that stuff. But for the most part is word of mouth. And so we're able to piece trips together based on people that we know. And so that's given us an advantage right now because we're not calling people just out of the blue and saying, hey, by the way, I'm Oscar. I, work at this church and I'm part of this ministry, Replenish, and we do this, this, and this. And how's your soul today? And it's like somebody that I've never talked to in my life. And so
It's like door-to-door evangelism.
Right.
But, yeah.
And so from my part, what I'm doing is I'm just reaching out to pastors that I know and saying, hey, how are you doing? How's your family? Are you guys okay? Is there anything that I can pray for you about? And then we had a Zoom meeting this past weekend on Friday. And, we had a couple guys from California. We had a guy that's out in Little Rock. The guy that I was telling you that is sheltering in place in Gulf Shores.
Yes.
And so
hard life.
Hard life. And so it was cool to some of the guys that were on that Zoom call I've met and I've been on a trip before. Other guys I don't know. But it was like getting to have one of our trips, but just for about an hour. And everybody got to share. We got to pray for each other. We got to check in and see where everybody was at. And so we're just being creative with it and figuring out a way that we can keep up with guys as we get ready for once this thing is lifted and we can get together again. We know we're going to have to hit the ground running incredibly fast. Right now, what we've been doing has just been guys, but one of our goals is to be able to do one for pastors' wives. And so that's something that's kind of in the works right now. And so that's what Rod is working with right now is like, okay, by the time this is done, we need to figure out how to do a trip for pastors' wives because it's not just pastors. And one of the things that I'm working on, and one of the reasons why I got involved with Replenish, because what I felt like was God was calling me was to do pastors' families. So instead of doing a trip where is 10 or 12 pastors or pastors' wives and doing it that way is picking one pastor family and spending a weekend with them.
Wow.
And just
That's amazing.
Taking them out to eat, even if it's in the same city, just like getting a couple of hotel rooms where they can stay, and then we're just gonna be friends. Like I want to be your friend. How can I pray for you? I want to be somebody that you can call and say, hey man, this week sucked. Like I had all these other things happen. Like, can I just vent? You know, and just be an ear, just be somebody that they can trust in that. And so this time that we're not able to do our normal stuff is time that we're taking to plan. It's time that we're taking to figure out what other ideas we can do, what other things we can do. And one thing that I felt really heavy coming into the shelter in place was I felt like the ministries, the pastors, the churches that can look at this time as an opportunity to be creative are the ones that coming out of it are going to have such a huge impact, because they'll have just this whole other perspective of what church can be and what ministry can be. And it is not tied to a building. And the building is awesome and it's great and it's necessary. But we can do ministry outside of it, and we can do ministry through Zoom calls and team meetings and all this other stuff.
And I agree. That's something I think as a whole, the team I'm on, we're excited about. We've already seen just incredible benefit from just being creative with student ministry, and we feel more like we're actually moving into the world that they exist in and that they live in, versus trying to pull them into, to your point, instead of just trying to pull them to a building, we're now living in their world on a daily basis, which has always been the goal. But for now, right now we're really doing it, and I love it because it's undermining our complacency in doing things as the status quo, and I think that's really important, and it's encouraging to hear that you guys are pursuing that as well. Kim's been super quiet. Do you have anything you want to ask?
No,
We'll only go a few more minutes
because now Kim's talking.
Because
no, I love hearing about ministries that have kingdom building consequences. So I just take it all in and listen to. I guess I really think a lot about how I wish Nathan and I had a resource like that when we were completely tapped out, because our end result was just to essentially step down for 2 years and kind of take a breather.
Yeah. And that's not a bad thing. I think a lot of people get there because of a lot of negative consequences, a lot of negative things. But I think it's important that we put in place a rhythm of rest, because we have to rest. Like, we have to take time to be with our families. We have to take time to do something to replenish ourselves.
Nice.
Wait a minute. I
Nice.
get it now.
We need that. Like, we need to do something that's fun and that gets us out of the daily routine that we're in,
Yeah.
And so, I do think that taking a year off or taking 2 years off, if you can do it, it's super beneficial. The way that I see God work in my life is through seasons. And so, coming up I'm turning 40 in a 3 weeks. And so if I was still doing the same thing that I was doing when I was 25, like it would mean I had no growth. It would mean, I would have just been kind of in that hamster wheel, just doing the same thing over and over and over. Whereas I feel like I started out in one place and I've been able to grow in what I do with tech and what I do with all these other things, and then grow in ministry, because what the world was experiencing when I was 25 is way different than what the world is right now.
Absolutely.
And so, and taking times to rest is super important for us in our family. What we do is we try and take just trips, like a day trip somewhere. And now my wife works for an airline, and so it's a little bit easier to get up and go somewhere. If you have someone in your family that's looking to get a job, I would highly suggest once we get out of this for them to work for an airline, because then you can travel.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's a blessing for us that my wife is able to work for this company, and so I know my body. I know when I start getting stressed out, and I'll say, "Hey, can we go anywhere? Like, can we
That's
just?"
awesome.
And so we'll take it, and we'll drop the kids off with my parents, or sometimes we'll take them, and let's just get out of Dallas, and just we'll talk on the plane, or we'll rent a car when we get there and drive, and just talk, and just kind of decompress from everything. Before she worked at the airline, we would just do road trips. So we'd drive to San Antonio, stop at the check stop, get a bunch of kolaches, and then keep driving. But doing something that will help us decompress. And so taking time off, I think it's important so that you don't get to that burnout. So that you can create some headroom for when the pressure's on, you have somewhere to go, and you're not just always on the red, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I definitely appreciate greatly what you're involved in, and just that vision for it. And hopefully we will be out of this soon, and we can actually say hi sometime.
Yeah. Yes.
And you can get on the trip. It's hard to be your 40th birthday and be locked inside. We have a 10-year-old having his birthday tomorrow, and it's like, yeah. We were commiserating. Yeah, we were commiserating earlier about canceled trips and plans and things like that. But we know that at some point we'll get to do them. So,
just trying to make the best of it for now. But it's definitely very, very tough to know that you're just stuck at home.
You're just stuck at home
for the foreseeable future.
I haven't even checked to see how much of Disney Plus my kids have watched and how far we are through the catalog.
Yeah,
I don't really think that's necessary.
No, it's kind of that when you're on vacation, carbs don't count. Like when you're in shelter at home, TV screen time doesn't really count.
No, it doesn't. It's especially when you have two working in the home, and they're one in his makeshift new office in the game room, and
correct.
Yes, correct. And then you're trying not to murder each other while you're both having to do Zoom calls at the same time.
Also correct.
Sucking up the bandwidth.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, my wife is in the in our office here at the house, and normally I'd be in the office all day, and if I needed to work, I have a little writing desk next to hers. That doesn't work when I'm here the full day, so I'm in the guest room, and I have a desk here. I have some of my music stuff on the side, and I'll put my headphones on and just work on music or something. Because to be in the same area, in that same room for 8 hours a day would not be.
No.
Right.
We need our space.
Yes, we got it. Yeah, that's us too. Well, hey, Oscar, thank you, man. This has been awesome to sit and talk and hear everything that's going on and hear your heart. And definitely, let's sit down and do this again at some point. We will love to get the information on Replenish, put it in the show notes, and have that for everyone who listens, and be able to get a hold of that, especially if someone's out there just you're feeling that burnout at some point. And I think we all get to it, and we can see it. And I think something you mentioned was just knowing yourself to know when it's coming is vital. But really, this has just been awesome to hear and to catch up. We hopefully will have this episode out quickly, definitely, so people can hear it. And again, if you want to get in touch with us, it's the Birds and the Lees podcast. You can reach us at podcastinglees@gmail.com. You can check us out. We are on iTunes. It's Apple Podcasts now. I got to break that habit now. Spotify, Stitcher, all the ones that you're listening to, we're there. We'd love to hear from you. Give us feedback. Tell us what we're doing well, where we can improve, but also to just say a thank you to Oscar for coming on tonight. And we look forward to hearing from you guys and to sharing more. Oscar, again, thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you guys
thank
for
you.
having me on.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
absolutely. And this is Nathan,
And this is Kim.
and we will hopefully continue to have a great quarantine. Talk to you later.